Mr. Chairman, I thank you for this opportunity to report to this Permanent Council, as I will tomorrow to the Emergency Committee, on the recent savage experience of my own country, Antigua and Barbuda, and particularly Barbuda, which is today decimated and destroyed. For the first time in 300 years, there is not a living person on Barbuda. A society of people who lived for generations on that island had to be plucked away from all that they own, all that they know, all that define them as a people. My government was compelled to evacuate all the inhabitants of Barbuda and move them to Antigua. Hurricane Irma mangled the island. There is no potable water, no electricity, and such buildings that are left are pitiful wrecks, incapable of providing shelter and dangerous to enter. Barbuda is 62 square miles. That is 6 miles smaller than Washington, D.C. Hurricane Irma was 364 miles wide when it spread itself across Barbuda, overwhelming the island both in size, strength, and ferocity. Its force was Category 5+, with winds gusting at 220 miles per hour. Neither Barbuda nor its inhabitants stood a ghost of a chance against so formidable and so all-encompassing a monstrous power. Despite all that, Barbuda had only one fatality. The majority of the people had heeded government warnings and sheltered in a government facility. The one fatality, however, was tragic. A toddler, a little boy, was sucked out of the hands of his guardian as she battled the unrelenting winds in an effort to get to the shelter too late after the storm had landed. His body was found the next day. We mourn that child, and the memory of his death will wrench our hearts for all time, even as with relief we give thanks that others did not suffer a similar fate. Antigua was fortunate, Mr. Chairman. It had little damage and remains open for business. That is just as well, for had Antigua also been damaged, I have no idea how we would have coped or how we could cope with the challenges that now lie before us. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I would like to invite distinguished colleagues to look at a brief video which gives an inkling into the experience of Barbuda as Irma pranced over it with what can only be described as a dance of the macabre. Mr. Chairman, that video had no polished end and no easy conclusion, but neither has the story of Barbuda and its experience with Irma. With the help of the government of Venezuela, which was the first responder to the plight we faced in Barbuda, all of the inhabitants of Barbuda were evacuated into Antigua. Many of them are now living in government buildings, converted into shared and cramped dwellings. Others have been taken into the homes of generous Antiguans. But the situation is untenable, and the costs are high. Overnight, the population of Antigua increased by 3%, suddenly, unexpectedly, and with no opportunity for planning. No country can easily absorb a sudden increase of 3% of its population. The strain on welfare services, on providing food and water, and a modicum of decent living is and will continue to be a considerable strain. 500 school children were part of that evacuation. In addition to all the other challenges, school places must be found for them so as not to interrupt their education and hamper their prospects in their future life. Mr. Chairman, it will be some time before the Barbudan community can be reunited with their homeland. A massive rebuilding program that is sustainable and resilient to further disasters has to be devised and implemented. The early indications of cost are in the region of $200 million, which is 20% of Antigua's gross domestic product. It is not a task from which my government and the people of my country will shirk, but we are realistic enough to know that we can never accomplish it alone. Several governments at a bilateral level have already come forward with help. All our sister countries in CARICOM, for instance, Venezuela, Chile, and Canada, whose Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, called my Prime Minister yesterday morning and sent in an expert team last night. We are truly grateful to each of these early responders and thank them most sincerely. My government has declared a state of emergency in Barbuda and identified it as a disaster area. As the Prime Minister said in that video you just saw, we are not asking the international community for help because we want. We are asking for help because we need. Barbuda is a natural disaster, but it is also a humanitarian crisis, and it cries out for a humanitarian response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Regarding